Hey guys, Mr. Ridgway here. With our next lesson, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into the splits that happened around Christianity. With that being said, we are then going to have to talk about the two big breakups that happen in this religion. So go ahead and get your warm-up done. You're going to be answering some questions on Pear Deck. So again, please make sure you properly log in and answer these. So that way I can make sure that I count you as here. Once we do that, you can see that we have got quite a bit to do today around both of these splits. Now, I'm not going to be taking you through everything in here. Some of this you're going to need to do independently just for the sake of time. So on the first split, okay, that is called the Great Schism, is how you pronounce this. There's a short text that you need to read right here. And then you're going to be making a Venn diagram that's going to explain the differences between the two types of Christianity we're going to get out of the Great Schism, which on the one hand, we have the Roman Catholic Church, and on the other, the Greek Orthodox Church, or sometimes just called like the Eastern Orthodox Church. That is all there for you. I trust that you can handle that. If you can't, don't worry. We're going to come back. We'll talk together about it more in class. So with that, I'm going to go on to the rest of the lesson, and I'm going to, in particular, be spending time on what is going to be the second breakup in Christianity, and that is going to be the Protestant Reformation. So let's go ahead and dive right into this, and we can really knock out this mini lesson hard. So we're especially going to be looking very closely here at how politics and religion and things like religious differences can have very, very profound causes and effects on kind of how religion functions. So we'll get into all that. Don't worry. So let's talk about the Protestant Reformation, okay, and what's going to cause it and things like that. First of all, on our T-chart of the Catholic family tree, you should understand that by now, because of the Great Schism, we have two different forms of Christianity. We have Catholic Christianity, which is mostly in Europe by this point, and then on the other hand, we have the Eastern Orthodox, kind of Greek Orthodox kind of Christianity. We're going to kind of set aside the Greek Orthodox Christianity for now. We will eventually return back to them, but it'll be a while. So let's talk about this Catholic Christianity that's going on in Europe. It's going through, by the time that we hit about the year 1500, again, the Roman Empire has long gone past. It's long been dead. We've had numerous groups come into Europe and settle it by this point, and the Catholic Church has been there for a good long time, give or take about 1500 years. And so it's having some problems that come along with getting old. And that is, number one, things like corruption, because as some people in positions of power have gotten more cozy, they're starting to use money immorally. That's what corruption is. And there's also starting to become some very open disagreements, as you'll see, about something called religious doctrine. And that's like, what are the exact beliefs of the church? So let's talk about what some of these problems are. Okay. Before you do that, I'd like you to answer on Pear Deck. Do you think that corruption, again, using money immorally, exists today? And then what part of today's society you do believe is the most corrupt? If you do. And then tell me why. So you can draw me a picture, you can put in some text. Go ahead and do that for me. Okay, I'm going to fix the formatting on this slide while I'm doing it because I'm looking at it right now and it does not look right. So let's fix this while I talk about Mr. Martin Luther. Okay, so Mr. Martin Luther is that dude right there. No, I'm not talking about Martin Luther King Jr., a little bit different. This Martin Luther is the OG, if you will. And this Martin Luther in particular is worth knowing for something that is going to be called the Protestant Reformation. He's really going to cause the next big breakup in Christianity. So Martin Luther, he is a Catholic monk who lives in Germany at this time. Okay, that's him right there. He in particular is really annoyed by the corruption that is in the Catholic Church. And he has some doctrine issues too. We'll get to that in a second. The thing about corruption that made Martin Luther particularly annoyed was something that the Catholic Church was doing at this time. And he had a local preacher that he goes and targets for this. And what the Catholic Church was doing is that you could, at this time, go to your local preacher, okay, or a priest, if you will, and you could buy something called an indulgence. Okay, now if you indulge in something, it means like, you're enjoying chocolate or something like that. This is not that. An indulgence is this piece of paper that you could buy that would forgive you or anyone that you bought it for of any sins that you might or might have incurred. So, for example, again, because Christians at this time, still very much to this present day, believe that if you have sinned in some way and you haven't been forgiven of those sins, that you are going to hell. These indulgences are kind of like a get-out-of-jail-free card, if you want to think of them like that. And so you're like, oh, I know I've done this in the past. Let me buy this indulgence real fast. It's $9.99 plus shipping and handling, and I'm forgiven for my sins. And Martin Luther looks at this and he's like, heck no, like this is garbage. Like, this is an actual, like, you're selling an invisible thing. You can't sell forgiveness. You could also buy indulgences for like past relatives who you thought were in hell. You could even pre-buy indulgences for things that you thought you were going to do in the future. It's like, yeah, I might go rob somebody later today. Let me buy an indulgence just in case I do that. So again, Martin Luther looks at this and he's like, this is the most corrupt shenanigans I have ever seen in my entire life. And that is going to lead him, and again, I'm about to fix formatting here while I talk, that is going to lead him to making some very, very open protests here. So let's talk about this while I fix formatting. Luther is going to set off a firestorm, and what he's going to do is he's going to, and now I will uncrop this photo so you can see what he's actually doing in that photo. He decides to nail 95 theses, not feces, that's gross, theses, protests to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany. And theses are just arguments, protests, things that he doesn't like. Number one are those indulgences. Okay, and then number two are the things that I didn't tell you about, which is the doctrine issues that he had with the Catholic Church. Martin Luther, as nearly all Protestant churches today believe, it takes issue with this idea of the Catholic Church that in order to get grace, which means you go to heaven, that you have to do two things. You have to have faith and you have to have works. And what are these things? Well, faith is the believey part. Works are these things that the Catholic Church, still to this very day, believes. Things like communion or, like, I don't know, like the sacrament of marriage would be another work, right? Or, getting your last rites would be another one. And Luther looks at that and he's like, no, the only thing you need is faith. And so he takes issue with this idea. The last thing, which may seem surprising to you, if, again, you are not familiar with this part of history, is that Luther wants the ability for people to be able to read the Bible in their own vernacular or language. At this time, when you would go to Mass in Europe, you would show up, you sit down, I'm sure you'd kneel or do, whatever things you would do at Mass, but the entire service would be in Latin, and you would not understand a single word of it, because the preacher, the priest, is the only person who would be speaking Latin there. You would only be able to speak your own language, and as you can imagine, that makes understanding things difficult. Not only that, you are not allowed to take home the Bible and read it for yourself. And again, Luther, being a person who is wanting to make the Bible, and the idea of all you have to have is belief to get grace, he wants the Bible to be available to everybody in their own language. So he's got some pretty serious protests, and this is going to set off a firestorm that we will get to here in a second. So go ahead, summarize for me on Pear Deck. Do this before you go on. It's really important you take some time to do this kind of metacognitive activities. What were Martin Luther's problems with the Catholic Church? What did he believe was true or should change? So let's talk about this firestorm that he is going to set off. It is called the Protestant Reformation. It is in many ways probably one of the most influential religious movements in the last 400 years, give or take. What is it? It's a huge wave of religious and political dissent, and we'll kind of explain what that means. This is going to be, and no exaggeration here at all, a source of conflict for literally hundreds of years that is going to kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Again, if you can look at the map here, and it looks like a kindergartner has vomited every different form of Crayola crowns on it, you can see that all of a sudden we have just this huge breakup in Christianity. It's worse than the graduation at the end of your high school year in terms of breakups. Okay, it's bad. So let's talk about how these how this Protestant Reformation is going to look. I'd like to give you an example that you can actually kind of run with. Well, it quickly becomes not only religious, as there are people who do, like Martin Luther, who have some profound religious disagreements with the Catholic Church, but it also becomes political, because there's people who are going to look at this event and then use it to seize their own opportunities to, gain themselves power, or things like that. So I give you the mass of the man that is King Henry VIII of England. Now, King Henry VIII, again, who was the King of England at the time, he was a diehard Catholic until he could not have kids. And when I say he could not have kids, he could not have a boy. And he kept blaming the women that he was married to for this problem. In fact, he's going to go through 6 wives. So the order of what he does to the wives is this. The 6 wives of King Henry VIII: divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. So yes, he's going to behead 2 of his wives in this attempt to get himself a male heir. Okay, because again, if you're a king at this time, how you pass down being a king is by having baby boys. Now, again, when King Henry VIII has his first wife, Mary, I believe is her name, she will not give him a boy, and we all know that's totally her fault, which now, of course, nowadays, modern genetics, we know it's the guy who either contributes the X or Y chromosome. So he's desperate to get a divorce, but at this time, if you wanted a divorce, you had to go to the Pope to get one. And don't get me wrong, King Henry VIII had an amazing relationship with the Pope at the time, whose name is escaping me. But I mean, King Henry, he was even called the defender of the faith. He had a great relationship, but he goes to the Pope, asks for a divorce. Will you please annul my marriage? And the Pope says no. And for King Henry VIII, he's like, okay, I hate Martin Luther, but I'm going to use this opportunity to break away from the Catholic Church. And he makes his own church, called the Church of England. It's how we get the Anglican Church. It's basically the exact same thing as the Catholic Church. He just makes himself the head of his own church. And then what does he do? He grants himself a divorce. Voila, look at that. Magic. And all of a sudden, then, he burns through 5 more wives, and he finally does have a male kid, but he dies at a pretty young, early age, and then we'll get Queen Elizabeth I. But that's for another time. So he's a really, really good example of a king who, he wasn't really that concerned about the religious. I mean, he obviously had some, problems with, Martin Luther, but he was more using the Protestant Reformation to gain political power, to try to get himself a divorce so that way he could have a baby boy. There's other examples, and if you look back at the map, you can kind of see back here in this part that is Germany. If you see that a bunch of areas are breaking away here from the Catholic Church, this kind of pink area in Prussia, that's because there's German princes who, for example, they don't want to have to pay the Pope anymore, because, again, being part of the Catholic Church, you would have to send the Pope money. Again, the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church at this time. The last thing you should know about Protestantism and the Protestant Reformation is that once it starts to fracture, because as you can see from the map here, we get Anglicans, we get Lutherans, we get Calvinists. It's like Pringles. Like, once you pop, you just can't stop. We're going to get everything from Mormonism to Jehovah's Witness to Puritans to the Quakers. I mean, it just breaks and breaks and breaks and breaks and breaks, and it's never going to stop, and still hasn't. Because as soon as anybody has any kind of disagreement with the church that they're a part of in the Protestant church, they're just going to go make their own. And so that is going to be kind of the big legacy of that, is that we're going to get a huge amount of different kinds of Christianity from the Protestant Reformation. So right down here, again, here's kind of the biggest differences that I'd make sure you star and know between the Catholic Church and Luther. Luther will go on to form his own kind of Christianity called Lutheranism. No surprises there. You can, again, see those big differences. So that is kind of the big things that I wanted you to be able to walk away from with the Protestant Reformation. The last thing here is something called the causes, content, and consequences chart. And that is, this is a chart that you're going to be completing. It's in a PowerPoint template, so you can just make your own copy of it and then type on top of it. And we are now going to go ahead and do the first part of this chart together. Okay, so again, I would expect that if you were in class, we'll just do this, straight up together. If you're with me digitally, this would be a good time now to go ahead and download your own copy and then copy exactly what I'm going to be doing here, so that way you have it available. Okay, let's see. I want to make sure that I haven't missed anything because again, there's a lot in this mini lesson, and I want to make sure that we are all good on that front. Let me make sure that I missed anything. Oh yeah, so let's talk about the basics of this chart, because again, once we do these together, you're going to be doing the other 3 columns on your own. Okay, each station each column is then on the following slides, and you'll see them. So let's talk about causes. Okay, the causes are pretty straightforward. That's the one that students tend to get the easiest. It's like what causes something to happen, right? It's the catalyst, contributing factors, things like that. The content on this CCC chart, if you will, is the actually what it was, like the what happened on the ground. A lot of students get confused when they see content, and you just again want to make sure that you understand, like, that's like the stock standard definition, what it immediately was. It also, for a lot of students, like it tends to be what they might often like label as like the effects of something. Again, it's the what happened. The last C is not effects, it's consequences. And this is like big picture thinking, like the significance, why we should care, why it matters. Like if we take a step back, what should we understand from that particular thing that we're looking at? Okay. One thing to note here before we do the CCC chart together is that you do need to turn this into Schoology when you are done. But let's go ahead and take a look at it and do this first column of the CCC chart together. And I will zoom in here so that we can see nice and, well, let's do like 100%. So that way we can see everything nice and clearly. So why did the Protestant Reformation happen? Well, we could say that the first problem is corruption, okay, in the Catholic Church. I think that would be the most straightforward answer. Again, corruption in the Catholic Church. I think that would be pretty easy to label. I think, again, there's going to be differences over doctrine. Again, notice that we're trying to use the vocab in our answer. And then I think we would be remiss to mention Martin Luther. Also a good idea during this is to mention examples of things. So like, for example, corruption in the Catholic Church, we could say indulgences, right? The content, okay? What actually was the Protestant Reformation? Again, that's the one that we're doing together here. Well, it was a breakup in Christianity, okay? And specifically in Catholic Christianity. There we go. It's also, it was religious and political. Okay. A good example of something that happens in the Protestant Reformation might be, I don't know, we get Lutheranism, right? We could also put in here King Henry VIII and his 6 wives, right? So again, notice, like, we're putting in the things that immediately happen, right? That's what the content is. Now, the consequences, why should we care? A huge diversity of churches. And again, we could talk about tons of examples of these. Baptists, Mormons. I mean, you go on and on and on and on and on and on and on, right? And then I think, again, another big picture consequence out of this is that this is going to be a source of wars and conflicts for hundreds of years. It's going to be extremely, extremely destructive. Now, okay, I will go ahead and tell you for these other three columns, okay, the Catholic Counter-Reformation, that's going to be the Catholic Church fighting back against the Protestant Reformation. Okay, it's like a counter-punch. The Peasant Revolt of 1524 and the Jews being persecuted, these are all, in part, going to be caused by the Protestant Reformation. So I would go ahead and list PR in the top, reason for each of these three. I seem to have forgotten a text box for this one. Whoops. Don't know how that happened. I would make sure, again, that you put the Protestant Reformation in each one of those boxes, but please understand there's also other things that are going to cause those particular ones too, so just don't leave it as PR. Again, content and then big picture consequences, and this chart is what you're going to turn into me, okay, on Schoology. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next lesson, and we'll make sure, again, don't freak out about this chart thing. We're going to have lots of practice with it, and we'll talk about, the Great Schism again to, go back on things, and I will see you guys in the next lesson. Bye-bye.